election. Let's talk to Robert Merrick, who is, of course, a political journalist. Robert, very good morning to you.
Good morning.
So, Boris Johnson suddenly makes an appearance. I think the general consensus is, yeah, he's great at making a speech, but it's not going to make an awful lot of difference.
Well, it appears to be classic Boris Johnson, doesn't it? We were told at the start of the campaign that he would help his party, despite no longer being an MP. And where has he been? He's been on holiday for all of the campaign. And he turns up at the death when, of course, it's far too late, when, as you were saying, the election is almost certainly lost. And he, of course, overshadows the Prime Minister, as he did last night, which is not really doing Rishi Sunak too many favours. So I suspect that within Conservative circles, there's probably quite a lot of cold fury about Johnson's behaviour over recent weeks, and the fact that he turns up and grabs the limelight and suggests that it's really more about Boris Johnson than it is about the interests of the Conservative Party.
Well, of course, he says that he was asked to do it. Let's have a look at what he said.
They can achieve nothing at this election except to usher in the most left-wing Labour government since the war with a huge majority, and we must not let it happen. Don't let the Putinistas deliver the Corbynistas. Don't let Putin's pet parrots give this entire country psittacosis, which is a disease you get, by the way, from cozying up to pet parrots. If you actually want higher taxes next week, this year, if you feel you've got a few thousand to spare, then vote Labour on Thursday.
Well, Boris Johnson, the thing that was interesting for me, Robert, was that apparently at the actual event itself, Rishi Sunak and Boris Johnson didn't see each other, from what we can gather. They weren't on stage together. They didn't share any moments together. He said he was asked by Rishi to come and do it, but that was the only mention that Rishi Sunak actually got.
Yes, well, of course, Johnson still blames Sunak for helping to bring him down, so that there's clearly a huge schism between them still. And as I say, I think from Rishi Sunak's point of view, I guess having said at the start of the campaign that Johnson would play a part, he was invited to do this. But I think what it would have done is to show so many people that Boris Johnson is still a massive character, love him or hate him. He's somebody who can still make a great speech, who can excite a crowd. And, with the best will in the world, that's not really what Rishi Sunak has done through this campaign.
And so, I mean, it could be that it has an effect on some Tory voters who perhaps are feeling a bit lacklustre, who were thinking, yeah, you know what, it's going to be raining, it's going to be a bit mean and nasty out there, I don't think I'll bother. Because Tories famously don't like to vote when they're not very happy with their party. They don't tend to change their vote. They just don't bother. Do you think he might at least galvanise some of those people to go out and do something?
It's possible. It's probably very difficult to say. But I think the key point is that although he excited the crowd last night, he can still deliver a great speech. This is not the Boris Johnson in the public eye of 5 years ago, and undoubtedly he was very popular. Now he is very, very unpopular. He resigned in disgrace over Partygate, and of course it was that disgrace which started the decline of the Tories to the desperate state now. So I'm sure that many Tories and many Tory members will blame him for the decline of their party, and many Tory voters will still be furious about him, his behaviour over Partygate, and what is seen as his broken promises in office. He promised to level up the country. It never happened. And of course, those voters in the Red Wall, which delivered victory for him 5 years ago, are the ones who are going to turn out en masse for Labour tomorrow, partly because of that perceived betrayal over levelling up.
Well, interestingly enough, there's a lot of people as well in the Tory party, in the members area, of course, who don't like the fact that Rishi Sunak stabbed Boris in the back, and they blame him for Boris having to leave. And so there's a sort of double-edged whammy, because there's nobody that's happy, really, in the Tory party. Some of them, like you said, are unhappy about Boris and what he did. Others are unhappy about what Rishi Sunak did, but they're just generally unhappy.
Well, I think you've summed it up very well. And what, of course, this points to is a party that's going to leave office tomorrow, for whom it's all over. And I think the striking thing about the last 24 hours, the last week perhaps, is that you are hearing these senior Conservatives concede defeat ahead of Election Day. I've covered many general elections. I've never seen that before, when one party gives up before the country actually goes to the polls. So today we have the former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, saying it's all over.
Right.
I've just been listening to Mel Stride, the Work and Pension Secretary, saying it's all over. And of course, Rishi Sunak has effectively been conceding defeat every time he urges voters to deny what he calls a Labour supermajority. That is conceding defeat in effect. And I think we've never seen that before.
No. And I mean, in its way, that might be the last sort of throw of the dice, conceding defeat, in the hopes that not enough people will turn out because they'll all think, well, it's such a foregone conclusion, I won't actually bother. Let's have a look at what Keir Starmer said yesterday in Staffordshire.
We've been campaigning since day one, with a smile on our face, with a spring in our step, with a very positive case to take the country about change. And if you're a family that's been struggling for months and years with the bills bearing down on you because of the cost of living crisis, if you're a business that's been struggling for years because of the damage that's been done to the economy by this government, if you've served in uniform or served your community, then this campaign, this Labour campaign, is for you, and this fight for change is for you, because the choice at this election is clear and it is stark. We've had 14 years now of chaos, division and failure. We'll get more of the same if the Tories are back on Friday morning, or we can turn the page, or we can start to rebuild our country with Labour.
I mean, Labour is still quite reluctant, aren't they, Robert, to say we've got it in the bag. They won't say that, presumably.
Of course, no. They will never say that because, A, the voters hate that sort of complacency, but B, they need to get their own supporters to turn out. And that is the only perhaps remaining danger for Labour tomorrow, is that if their own supporters believe it's in the bag, that they don't really need to go out and vote. If it's raining tomorrow and they stay at home, that's the fear. So Labour, of course, needs to maintain what might well be the illusion that this is still a competitive election until everybody has voted. But of course, within Labour, they know that they are going to form the next government. They've known that for a long time. And of course, they now know it with great certainty. And they hopefully, for the sake of the country, will be prepared for government because they've had a long time to think about it.
Well, you do wonder about that because there's an awful lot to do. I mean, they're talking of solving the prisons crisis first because that's the massive crisis that needs to be sorted out. But can I ask you about the postal voting system just before we go on? So I don't know if you know the answer to this. I spoke to a guy in France just now who says that he's got his postal vote yesterday. He posted it off today. But basically he doesn't think it will get here in time. What happens if you get a postal vote into wherever it's being sent to, but it doesn't get in time to be counted? Does that mean it doesn't count?
Well, I'll be honest, I've never asked myself that question, but I assume it doesn't. I assume it doesn't count.
I'm assuming you have to get it in by polling day because, I mean, the Royal Mail's hit back today in the Telegraph and said basically that it's all the fault of the government who called a snap election. Therefore, they weren't prepared to get all the postal votes out there. I don't know what effect it will have. I don't know why suddenly postal votes have become very important, but there's about 8 million of them apparently, which seems very high.
Yes, I think it's a huge increase, perhaps of about 2 million from last time. So as you say, it's a hugely significant factor in this election. I assume if somebody's postal vote is not there by 10 p.m. tomorrow when the ballot box is closed, it will not be counted. And presumably there will be some people who are disenfranchised for that reason. Whether it'll be enough to change the vote in any area, well, who knows? But I guess if we've been talking through this campaign as we have about collapsing public services, it seems ironic that here we are talking about another one that seems to be in a situation where it's unable to cope with even allowing everybody to cast their votes on polling day. And maybe that's just indicative of what's happened to the country.
Yeah, absolutely right. I have been told it is officially the case. You're absolutely right that if the postal vote is not in to the local count by 10 p.m. on polling day, it won't be counted. So might be some bad news. Although I have to say, here's another one for you. I'm sorry to put you on the spot like this, but we've got Gary saying this because we had this guy on who rang in from France. He says, why does that fella get a vote if he's living in France? How many others are voting who don't live here and not just people who have sodded off to Europe? I mean, is there a point at which you have to qualify for a postal vote? Do you have to not be, if you live abroad, surely you shouldn't be voting in a British election, should you?
Well, I can answer this one, hopefully, which is that until recently, you could only vote in a British election if you lived abroad as a British citizen for no more than 15 years. Right. And the government changed the law. And so now you can vote as a British citizen abroad for however long you've been abroad. And undoubtedly, the Conservatives changed the system because they hoped there were lots of rich expats abroad who would vote for them. Right. But of course, what's happened in other European countries is that Brits are still furious about Brexit. So if they vote at all, they'll probably vote against the Conservatives. So that feels like yet another own goal to me.
Does sound a bit strange, doesn't it? So, I mean, final day today, what's going on? What are they all up to? Will they be sort of pushing out the boats into... I know that's probably the wrong analogy to use at this point in time. They won't be pushing out the boats, will they? Be welcoming them in. Will they be kind of, all guns blazing out and about, or are they just going to sort of hunker down and try and figure out what to do on Thursday?
It'll be all guns blazing, I think. I know that we've been trying to find out whether Keir Starmer plans to do one of those madcap campaigning for 24 hours escapades, which has been a feature of recent campaigns. I think particularly Nick Clegg, or was it some other Lib Dem leader, started in John O'Groats,
right,
at midnight and finished in Land's End at the end of the day. I don't think Keir Starmer's going to be going to quite those lengths. But yes, as said, it's still all about trying to ensure you get the vote out, that nobody is complacent, that you knock on every single door, that at the end of the day you've done everything you possibly could to maximise the vote. So yes, there'll be lots of exhausted politicians tonight.
Yes, I'm sure there will. Good to talk to you, Robert Merrick. Thank you very much indeed.